Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Finally, and I do mean finally, I have a chance to share my story. I have witnesses that can account to my stark fear the night it happened. Unfortunately, they still laugh at me about my claims till this day. I used to live on Davis Road in Loveland, Ohio. I lived in an old cabin with a friend. I cannot remember the exact date for the life of me, but I do remember it being in December of 2013. It was approximately 10 p.m. at night, and it was one of the first snows on a fairly cold, almost freezing night. When I first moved in with my friend, I had no idea about frogmen or mothmen and poplick monsters. Sometimes when I was exploring the creek next to the cabin that led to a stone's throw distance to the Little Miami River, I found carefully stacked towers of stones in the creek. I felt it was very strange and had a leery feeling about them. It seemed like something a witch was doing for ceremonial purposes. Although I wasn't exactly 100% sure, I usually slept it off as something the neighbor kids were doing. But what was even odder and scarier is the very next day I noticed the stacks of rocks would change and move to different spots. Sometimes there were more of them in certain areas. A part of my mind passed that notion off as seismic actions in the ground and flow of water in the creek. Very peculiar, yet feeling like I was always being watched. I felt special and afraid at the same time. It was one of those things I always hastened to mention until now. Until this day can show someone where it is. I moved in late summer, and nights came with the sound of screeching, hissing, and growling animals way in the distance at first. Here's where it starts to get scary. It seriously felt like whatever animal that was fighting or in pain was knowing I heard it from a vast distance. I would purposely summon the anguished screeches sometimes. And as the summer turned to fall, the screeching came closer and closer. Puffs, hisses, and seemed to puff air and growled. This phenomena was so similar to a raccoon in a fight that it was very easy for me to pass it off as just that, a fighting raccoon or a raccoon fighting with a cat. But again, something was different, and that feeling of empowerment came with it. It got to a point I felt like I had the power to sort of call it out. As fall approaches winter, the crying raccoon, or almost like a deer warning call, came and seemed to meander around the forest that surrounded the cabin we lived in. I never really believed in ghosts and ghouls, so I'd pass it off as my mind playing tricks on me with the sound of the waves and the current of the Little Miami River. Then, as the leaves were almost all gone, there was the first snowfall that year. I was on the back patio of the cabin when the screeching animal sound was at the hillside directly behind our cabin in the backyard. At first I was excited. Finally I could confirm the two red glowing eyes were a creature hunting and attacking a raccoon. Then the eyes looked directly at me. I thought to myself, no way is it looking at me. But it was. It was a black dark mass. I spoke in a whisper and dared it to come at me. I was completely taken back and petrified when out of nowhere one of the eyes lifted up really high and the other eye joined up to it. This black massive object or thing seemed to be very curious at me and started tracing the hillside headed towards my way. It started a vertical path about 300 yards away. I even remember saying, no way is it really coming my way. But I knew it was. It got louder. It was big and thumped in the rough and got quicker and quicker. I challenged whatever this creature was and stood my ground until it was literally only a few dozen yards trampling towards me. And when it thumped closer, it got fast and seemed monstrous and huge. Yes, I turned and ran in excited fear for my life. So much fear I jumped over my friend's motorcycle and ran into the house, slamming the door behind me. I ran inside and bolted upstairs, charging into my friend's room upstairs where they were all playing video games and acting like nothing was happening. My one friend Jim went to the window laughing at me and said yes, there seemed to be a gust of escaping steam in the cold of the winter night shining against the light of the back porch security light. My friends joke at me till this day. They say Frogman says hi, said it was Frog Lady in love with me. I know what I saw. I am not crazy. I hated that nobody else was with me. And I'll never summon that beast ever again.
Visiting Chinatown. Alone as usual. Pop into a dumpling shop, and on this particular day it's pretty dead. Normally it's bustling. Order a fuck ton of pork and soup dumplings and the waitress disappears into the kitchen. As I wait for my food, I look around and notice that the only people in the restaurant are me, an old couple in the corner, and one Asian businessman on his phone. The old couple is eyeing me strangely. I nod and smile, but they look away. Service bell dings. Here comes my food, yes. Look over at the double doors leading to the kitchen. They open and I watch as my tray of food makes its way over to me. balanced delicately on the raised arm of a big fat frog in a smock. I glance around. WTF is this? Old couple is scowling at me now. Asian businessman doesn't even seem to notice, he's glued to his phone. The frog person walks up to my table, drops off my food, he's just barely tall enough to do this, then turns around and walks back into the kitchen, just like a little person. A few moments of disbelief pass. Old couple still scowling, Asian businessman gets up and leaves. After a while hunger takes over and I simply chow down. I had never had, and to this day have not had, such fucking delicious dumplings. I ordered enough to take home with me, but ended up eating everything, my plates were totally clean. Never see the frog again, but leave a generous tip when I pay my tab. Thank you, my amphibious friend, whoever you were.
We bought a little house down by the Loveland Castle Museum back in 2000. It was perched above a ravine and creek, and the back of the house dropped off very steeply. There would have been enough room for a man or a bipedal person to stand behind the house, but the basement windows were eye level and the first floor was quite far up from the place where one could stand. The reason I point this out is that because it was a very small house, we had to use the basement for our 2 boys' bedrooms. They kept complaining that something kept looking in the window at them and my husband and I laughed it off at first. It was a wooded setting, very rural and beautiful, and very dark at night, having no streetlights out there. So it seemed funny that they were thinking something was watching them. We just told them maybe it was a deer. They are plentiful in the fall and went about our business. One night, however, I woke up hearing a weird sound just outside our bedroom window on the first floor. It faced out back of the house, and I was puzzled as to what it could be because it sounded like a man breathing heavily. I started to sit up and realized that whatever it was looking in my window, just inches from my head, and I was terrified. I did not look out because I knew that I would see it, and I kept feeling something urging me to look. We often would hear squeaking noises, screeching, not like an owl and a crying baby. I woke my husband up and he said whatever it was, it would have had to be 10 feet tall to look in our window. I couldn't sleep that night, but whatever had been there had moved on. I didn't mention it to the kids the next day. The boys came up from the basement, shaken from seeing the red, glowing eyes the night before. They were every bit as big as red road reflectors and they heard heavy breathing and the hair on their bodies stood up on end. This was only one experience we had out there in Loveland. It's right down by the Little Miami River, only a stone's throw. Many weird things out there, green glows, orbs, something very large and black on top of the roof of the house very late at night. When light was shone on it, it did not go through whatever it was on the roof, and it looked like a huge, dark figure. I'd like to know if you have any more weird stories about this area. We moved a few miles away but still go past that area often.
San Luis Potosí, Mexico, October 1965, afternoon. Francisco Estrada Acosta had gone out on a small game hunting expedition near a local mining area. He followed the Santiago River and arrived at the San Jose Dam. There, while bending down collecting rocks for his slingshot, he felt the presence of someone standing next to him. Standing up, he was startled to see a tall figure with a large oval-shaped head, huge reddish phosphorescent eyes and a large toad-like mouth. The strange humanoid extended a flipper-like hand to Acosta and touched one of Acosta's hands on his palm. The touch felt cold and scaly like that of a reptile or an amphibian. Terrified, Acosta stepped back and ran from the area. Glancing back, he noticed that the creature had membrane wing-like protrusions on its back and was apparently preparing to leave also.
I have an interesting story that I'm not sure what to make of it. It wasn't directly me but still creeps me out to this day. A few years back I was living with my sister for a bit. I was waiting to be sent off to boot camp, Marine Corps. For reference, we lived on the 3rd floor of a house in the Meadowlands, New Jersey. The backyard was pretty secure and you can look out the window and see what the kids were up to. My sister had 2 boys at the time, they were about 6 and 7. They'd go outside and play in the backyard all the time with some neighborhood kids. We are on the 3rd floor like I said, and every so often I'd look out to make sure they are okay or go downstairs just to check on them. Well, it was a Sunday evening about 6:30 p.m. and it was starting to get dark, so they were close to coming inside. I hear them scream. I look out the window and see the gate being closed. I bolted down the stairs as fast as I could and got to the kids. The 7-year-old is in shock and the 6-year-old is shaking. But okay. I asked him what happened. All he said to me was the frog people were talking to them. I'm like, WTF. These kids were good kids and didn't really lie. I said, what do you mean? He said, the frog people tried to talk to us and broke the lock on the gate. Then we screamed and they ran away. I don't know what the hell to make of it, but a few things are clear. The lock was broken and I knew that there was a lock because I put it on there. Outside, the backyard led to a concrete area. When I looked at the ground, there wasn't much, but it had a little bit of water, almost like a trail. I had seen the gate swinging closed, but I didn't see anything. I did have a pretty big field of view, but I may have overlooked whatever because I did bolt down the stairs. What do you think? What are these frog people? I'm new to this, but still kind of spooky. I started to get interested after this happened. I will also say my one nephew does have a few problems. Now, I don't know if it's related, but he won't talk about that day. The other nephew kind of just says he doesn't remember much.
In March 1749, the fishermen of Kapovart caught a boy of around 8 to 10 years old in a swampy part of Lake Karali in Hansag. The captured creature was an orphan child who had been lost but had somehow survived in the water world around the lake and gone wild. According to contemporary descriptions, the speechless, completely wild child was perfectly adapted to life in the moors. He was naked, his skin was thickened like a crust, his body was covered with fur, and rudimentary skin was stretched between his fingers. According to eyewitnesses, he was able to catch fish even while swimming underwater. The child was christened Istvan on March 17, 1749, according to the register of the Kapovar parish. In the registry, an entry was made in Latin about the baptism, translated as, on March 17, a found-witted boy, Istvan, about 8 years old, was conditionally baptized. His godparents are Mihai Huxinger and Anna Maria Mesner. The boy was then taken to the castle of the Esterhazys and entrusted to the care of Pal Rosenstengel. We have information about his further fate from the extant records of the mayor. He could not speak, nor could he be taught, he only made animal sounds. He ate grass, raw fish and frogs, swam in the water like a fish, and had webs between his fingers. They tried to teach him, but without success, so they entrusted him with carrying water and turning stakes. The Hajduks treated him rudely and cruelly. He ran away several times, and was brought back by dog teams. According to tradition, he had only one protector in the castle, the daughter of the bailiff named Juliska, according to other sources, Paraska, who protected him many times. Juliska got married around 1751. Haney Istok wanted to please his patron and poured a bowl of frogs on the wedding table. Then they beat him again, and he escaped the next day. This time they couldn't catch him. 4 years later, fishermen saw him again in the swamp, but he fell under the water and was never seen again.
In 1981, I was working for a contractor as a masonry apprentice after leaving trade school. That summer, we were working at Mystic Caverns in northern Arkansas. We were upgrading tour trails in the caves. On a Friday, it was getting close to quitting time. So myself and another guy had to go through the work area and make sure that all the tools were collected and that the safety barriers were in place. We weren't working during the weekend, so the work area had to be tightened up before we left. The guy who was with me had to leave, I forgot why, so I was down there by myself for a while. I was almost finished loading the cart when I heard faint pounding sounds coming from deeper in the cavern. I thought that maybe one of the crew may still be in the cave, so I yelled out. The banging stopped and it was quiet. Then I started to hear slapping sounds for a few seconds, then it got quiet again. I yelled out again. I didn't get a response, so I figured it was cave critters or bats. I started to make my way out. There was an area that I came upon, where on the right of the railing it dropped off into a depression. There was some lighting, but it was difficult to see the bottom of the depression. As I passed by, I heard splashing sounds coming from the depression. I stopped and I got a glimpse of something on 2 legs walking in the water below. Further away there was a section of the cavern that opened up and was well lit. As I watched, the splashing continued, then I saw this thing moving out of the shadows, moving away from me. The only way I can describe it was something walking on 2 legs with large frog feet. It stood about 5 feet and was dark grayish green. The head was large and rounded, though it never turned around, so I can't give much detail of the face. The body was thick in the chest but narrow at the waist and hips. It bent at the knees when it stepped and had shiny skin resembling a frog. I didn't notice any hair. I didn't hear any vocals, just the splashing as it moved away from me. I'd estimate that it was 70 or so feet from me when I first got a good look at it. I wasn't scared, just stunned. I grabbed the cart and quickly made my way towards the entrance. When we came back to work that next Monday, I didn't mention anything to anyone. I kept a sharp watch for anything out of the ordinary. The job lasted a few more weeks and I didn't observe any other weird stuff. A few weeks after this, I found out that one of my girlfriend's cousins worked at the Caverns. He replaced lighting and did other odds and ends, so he was in the cavern a lot. When I got the chance to meet him, I asked if he had ever seen something weird in the cave. He said that he hadn't seen anything out of the ordinary. I told him I was just wondering. I didn't want to alarm him with details of what I saw. I wasn't imagining this thing, and after all these years, I still get creeped out when I think of it. I have never heard or read about any other sightings in mystic caverns.
Location: Can Tho, Vietnam. Date: June 18, 1978. Time: night. The witness, Dinh Nguyen, a child at the time, remembered being warned by his grandmother not to go near the river because a strange living creature had been seen there by others in the neighborhood. There was even a report of a child having been abducted by the creature. Mostly the witness ignored such warnings, and one night while sitting on a coconut tree looking at the river he saw a very bright star-like object shoot out of the river and into the sky. The night of the full moon, the witness had asked his grandmother to accompany him to the river in order to use the restroom facilities. As they approached the river, both witnesses spotted two strange creatures sitting on a coconut tree by the river. The beings appeared to be talking to each other and pointing at the stars. The witnesses stood only about 10 feet behind the creatures, which had not noticed them yet. His grandmother was terrified and attempted to scream, but nothing came out. She grabbed the witness's hand really tight and was shaking. However, the young man felt no fear since he knew somehow that the creatures were not ghosts, as he could see their shadows under the moonlight. The creatures appeared not to be wearing any clothing as they sat on the coconut tree with their legs hanging down. They had an air of friendliness and relaxation. The young witness noticed that their skin was very white and slippery, looking like that of a fish. They had large hairless heads, their body was totally hairless. Their eyes were large and dark but shiny, their mouths and noses were small, and the witness noticed that their fingers and toes were long. The witness thought that the creatures were much taller than his grandmother. Suddenly his grandmother uttered a very loud scream, causing both creatures to turn and look at them. Immediately after that, both creatures stood up on the coconut tree and dived into the river, exactly like professional Olympic divers. The witness did not see a large splash on the water, and did not see the creatures come up for air. Other family members had by now arrived, wondering what had happened.
Azerbaijani fishermen from the trawler Baki were stunned to see a weird entity in the water. The entity swam for a long period of time near the trawler, parallel to it, reported Gafar Gasanov, captain of the ship, to the local newspaper Zindagi when he arrived at the Iranian port of Anzeli. At first the crew thought that the entity was some type of unknown large fish, but soon they noticed that the entity's head had distinct hairs on it, and the front fins were not fins at all but webbed hands. They acknowledged that the entity looked more like a humanoid than any kind of known fish. They all concluded that they had never seen something like it in the waters. The amphibian entity then plunged deep into the waters and disappeared from sight. When Captain Gasanov returned to Azerbaijan, people there refused to talk to him about the incident, alleging that he and his crew had all been drunk. But the Iranians took the report seriously because of numerous rumors about a man from the sea were circulating in Iran long before this report. After publication in the local newspapers, Zindagi, local Iranian residents wrote numerous letters to the newspaper reporting their own encounters with a similar entity. The common opinion was that underwater volcanic activity in the area of Babalsar and the intensification of oil extraction in the Caspian Sea has somehow caused unknown deep water dwellers to venture up to the surface. The entity is shorter than that of the average height, about 165 to 168 centimeters, thickset, with a protruding belly, feet with flippers, and four-fingered webbed hands. The skin is pale yellowish-gray in color and it has stiff black-green hair. Arms and legs are slightly shorter and thicker than that of humans. Sharp nails grow on its hands and also at the tip of its hump-shaped nose, forming something like a dolphin's beak. The ears are not visible. The eyes are big and round and the mouth is quite big with a protruding upper jaw, smoothly connected to the neck, without chin. The smaller lip is similar to that of a shark's jaw. In Iran, this amphibian humanoid is called Runah-Shah, which means sovereign of waters and rivers. Interestingly, the fishermen have noticed that the fish seemed to react when the entity appeared, as if there were some kind of distant, extrasensory communication between the entity and the fish. Other witnesses reported seeing the same or similar entity in May between the small fishing villages of Astara and Lencourt.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.